I never thought I would be that guy. The one who ruins a perfect marriage over a meaningless affair. But there I was, standing in our kitchen, as my wife Natalie stared at the contents of an anonymous letter someone had sent her. Photos of me with another woman. Screenshots of explicit text messages. Hotel receipts with timestamps. The evidence was undeniable and comprehensive. I watched the color drain from her face as she processed each piece of damning proof, her hands trembling slightly. The look in her eyes when she finally raised them to meet mine still haunts me. Before I share how this devastating moment changed everything, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if you have ever had to face the painful consequences of your own mistakes. At 34 years old, I had everything a man could want. A beautiful home in Chicago, a career that was skyrocketing, and most importantly, a marriage to the most incredible woman I had ever known. I met Natalie 4 years ago at an industry marketing conference where she was presenting research on consumer behavior. I was immediately struck, not just by her natural beauty but by her sharp intelligence and genuine warmth. She had this laugh that would fill a room, a confident way of moving through space, and eyes that seemed to look right through any pretense. Our first date lasted 6 hours, starting with coffee and ending with us walking along Lake Michigan until midnight, talking about everything from our childhood dreams to our theories on extraterrestrial life. By the third date, I knew she was different from anyone I had ever met. Within a year, I proposed on the same lakefront path where we had our first real conversation. The wedding was perfect, intimate, but elegant. We bought a renovated brownstone in Lincoln Park, filled it with furniture we chose together, and settled into what I thought would be our forever life. Natalie continued rising in her research firm while I worked my way up at Anderson Blake Marketing, one of the top agencies in the Midwest. We talked about starting a family within the next year, even began converting one of our spare rooms into what would eventually be a nursery. The problems began, I think, when I received a major promotion to executive client director. Suddenly, my workload doubled, and the pressure to perform became intense. I was traveling at least 2 weeks out of every month, constantly trying to keep our biggest clients happy, while securing new accounts. Natalie was supportive, even as our time together diminished. She would leave little notes in my suitcase when I traveled, send thoughtful texts throughout my long days, and always welcomed me home with understanding rather than resentment. I did not deserve her. That truth became painfully clear the day I met Rachel Bennett. Rachel was the new marketing director for Pinnacle Solutions, a New York-based tech company that represented nearly 20% of our agency revenue. From our first meeting, there was an energy between us that I should have recognized as dangerous. She was tall, confident, ambitious, and made it clear through subtle comments and lingering eye contact that she found me attractive. Unlike Natalie, who saw right through superficial charm, Rachel responded enthusiastically to the polished, powerful version of myself I presented in professional settings. The first time we crossed a line was after a client dinner in New York. We had been working together for about 2 months by then, maintaining a professional relationship despite the occasional flirtatious comment. That night, after several drinks and a successful presentation, we stayed at the restaurant bar long after our colleagues had left. The conversation shifted from business to personal, and by 1 in the morning we were sharing intimate details about our lives. By 2, her hand was on my knee under the bar. I knew I should leave. I knew exactly what would happen if I did not. Yet I stayed, telling myself I was just being friendly with an important client. Back at her hotel, the elevator ride to her floor was silent, charged with unspoken intention. I told myself I would just walk her to her room, say goodnight, maintain some semblance of propriety. But when she invited me in for one more drink, I did not hesitate. Within minutes we were kissing, all thoughts of my wife temporarily pushed aside by alcohol and desire. The next morning brought crushing guilt. I left before Rachel woke up, took the earliest flight back to Chicago, and spent the entire journey home hating myself. When I walked through my front door, Natalie greeted me with a warm hug and questions about my trip. I answered mechanically, already constructing the walls that would allow me to compartmentalize what had happened. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that I would never let it happen again, that Natalie would never need to know. But the account was too important to hand off to another director. Rachel and I continued working together, and what I had intended to be a single lapse in judgment evolved into a full-blown affair. For 3 months, I lived a double life, creating elaborate lies about client meetings and work emergencies to cover my trips to New York, or the occasional weekend when Rachel would visit Chicago, staying at a hotel downtown while I told Natalie I was working. The deception became almost routine. I created separate email accounts, used a password-protected folder on my phone for Rachel's messages, kept a change of clothes at the office, and became meticulous about deleting browser histories and receipts. The worst part was how I treated Natalie during this time. When she would question my late nights or express concern about my emotional distance, I would turn it around on her. I suggested she was being paranoid, that her insecurities were creating problems between us, that her clinginess was adding pressure when I was already stressed about work. It sickens me now to remember how I gaslighted the woman I had promised to love and honor, making her doubt her own instincts when they were absolutely correct. The affair was never about love. It was about ego validation, the thrill of doing something forbidden. But the guilt was constant, a background noise that grew louder with each passing week. After a particularly close call, when Natalie almost discovered a message from Rachel on my laptop, I realized how close I was to destroying everything that truly mattered in my life. During what would be our final weekend together in New York, I told Rachel we needed to end things. She seemed to take it surprisingly well, agreeing that we had gotten carried away, and that neither of us wanted to ruin our primary relationships or our professional connection. We agreed to be strictly professional going forward, and I flew back to Chicago believing I had successfully closed that destructive chapter of my life without consequence. I was wrong, catastrophically wrong. The morning everything fell apart. Started like any other Thursday. I was making coffee in our kitchen while Natalie prepared for an important client presentation. She was wearing the dark blue dress I had always loved, her hair pulled back, focused on reviewing her notes at the breakfast counter. The mail arrived earlier than usual, sliding through our mail slot with a soft thud. "Can you get that? I need to finish memorizing these figures," Natalie said without looking up. I picked up the small pile of envelopes, sifting through bills and advertisements, until I came to a thick manila envelope with no return address. It was addressed to Natalie, but I assumed it was work-related and opened it without thinking. That casual action shattered my world in an instant. Dozens of photographs spilled onto our kitchen counter. Me entering Rachel's hotel room. Us having dinner together at restaurants in New York and Chicago. My hand on the small of her back as we walked through a hotel lobby. Us kissing in a darkened corner of a bar. Each image was dated, the locations noted in neat handwriting at the bottom of each photo. Behind the photos were printouts of text messages between Rachel and me, complete with timestamps and dates. There were hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even a transcript of a phone conversation that made my skin crawl to read. Every piece of evidence had been meticulously gathered, organized, and presented for maximum impact. "Austin, what is it?" Natalie had noticed my frozen posture, the blood draining from my face. I tried to gather the materials to hide them, but it was too late. She was already beside me, looking down at the damning evidence spread across our kitchen counter. I watched her expression transform as she processed what she was seeing. Confusion, then dawning, comprehension, then a devastation so profound it physically hurt to witness. "What is this?" she whispered, picking up one of the photos. Her hand was trembling. "I can explain," I said, the most useless phrase in the history of infidelity. "Explain what?" "That you have been sleeping with this woman, that you have been lying to me for months." Her voice remained eerily calm as she examined more evidence, methodically looking through each piece, as if conducting research. She found the handwritten note tucked at the bottom of the envelope. "Natalie deserves to know who she really married." "Who sent this?" she asked, looking up at me with eyes that had gone hard and flat. "I have no idea," I answered truthfully. "How long has this been going on?" Her questions were precise, cutting through my panic. 3 months, I admitted, watching her flinch at the answer. "Do you love her?" "No. God, no. It was just. It did not mean anything. That is supposed to make me feel better." She laughed, a hollow sound, entirely unlike her normal laugh. "That you would risk our marriage for something that meant nothing." She continued her interrogation as I offered pathetic explanations and apologies that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Each question peeled back another layer of my deception, exposing the full extent of my betrayal. Not just the physical infidelity, but the elaborate lies, the manipulation, the way I had made her question her own perceptions when she sensed something was wrong. After 15 minutes that felt like hours, she simply stopped speaking. She gathered her purse and keys with deliberate movements. "Natalie, please, do not leave like this. We need to talk about this. I have heard enough," she said, her voice barely audible. "I cannot even look at you right now." The final glance she gave me before walking out contained something worse than anger, disappointment, mixed with a dawning realization that she had never really known me at all. I spent the next hours in a panic, calling and texting her repeatedly with no response. By evening, desperation drove me to contact Rachel, demanding to know if she had sent the evidence to my wife. Her shock seemed genuine quickly, turning to fear about whether her own relationship was similarly at risk. She swore she had told no one about us except for one close friend who would never betray her. It took 2 more days to discover the truth. David, a longtime friend of Natalie's who worked for a client based in New York, had spotted Rachel and me together at a restaurant. Recognizing me from photos and social media, he had grown suspicious and begun documenting our interactions. After gathering substantial evidence, he had first approached me, directly giving me an ultimatum: end the affair and confess to Natalie, or he would expose it himself. I had ignored his message, dismissing it as a bluff. It was not a bluff. That first night alone in our house was unbearable. I wandered from room to room, surrounded by the life we had built together, now teetering on the edge of destruction because of my selfishness. When Natalie finally texted at midnight, simply stating she was staying with her sister indefinitely and needed space relief, that she was safe, quickly gave way to the crushing reality that my marriage might already be over. The weeks following the letter were the darkest of my life. I completely fell apart at work, breaking down during a client call and taking emergency leave after my boss found me staring blankly at my computer, unable to function. The worst part was explaining what had happened, watching respect turn to disappointment in the eyes of people I admired. My desperate attempts to reach Natalie grew increasingly pathetic. I sent flowers that were returned. Emails went unanswered. My calls were eventually blocked. The only communications I received were from her sister Jessica telling me to give Natalie space, and from the lawyer Natalie had consulted about divorce proceedings. When I finally located and confronted David, his contempt was palpable. "I gave you a chance to do the right thing," he said. "You did not just cheat on Natalie, you made her think she was crazy for suspecting anything. Do you have any idea what that does to someone I did not?" But I was beginning to understand the full impact of my betrayal as I witnessed its ripple effects. Telling my parents was excruciating. My mother cried not just for Natalie, but for the son she thought she had raised better. My father, normally reserved with his emotions, explicitly expressed his disappointment. "I did not raise you to break promises," he said, simply, the words cutting deeper than any shouting could have. Natalie's family was understandably furious. Her father, who had welcomed me warmly into their family, sent a single text: "Stay away from my daughter until she decides otherwise." Without work to distract me, and with no contact from Natalie, I spiraled into self-destruction. I drank heavily, slept irregularly, and stopped caring about basic hygiene. I ignored calls from friends, unable to face their judgment or concern. My initial anger toward David gradually gave way to a painful self-awareness. The problem was not that he had exposed my affair. The problem was that I had conducted the affair in the first place. 4 weeks after the letter arrived, I finally dragged myself to therapy, something Natalie had suggested many times during our marriage for my workaholic tendencies and emotional avoidance. Dr. Martinez did not offer the easy validation or quick solutions I subconsciously wanted. Instead, she challenged me to examine the deeper issues that had led to my betrayal. "Affairs are rarely about sex," she explained in one session. "They are usually about unmet emotional needs and an inability to communicate those needs in a healthy way." Over several intense sessions, I began understanding how my childhood with emotionally unavailable parents had created a bottomless need for external validation. How I had learned to present a perfect facade rather than authentic vulnerability. how I used achievement and others' admiration to avoid addressing my core insecurities. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Jessica arrived at our house to collect some of Natalie's belongings. I had been avoiding the master bathroom, sleeping in the guest room instead, so I was unaware of what Jessica discovered, and reluctantly showed me an unopened pregnancy test in the medicine cabinet. The implications hit me with physical force. Natalie might have suspected she was pregnant right around the time she received that devastating letter. While I had been living my double life, she might have been preparing to tell me we were starting the family we had planned together. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by the potential magnitude of what I had destroyed. Jessica, despite her anger toward me, showed unexpected compassion. "She has not taken the test," she said quietly. "She has not mentioned anything about being pregnant. I am just letting you know what I found." That night, I reached my absolute rock bottom. I seriously contemplated leaving everything behind, moving to a new city, changing my identity, running from the mess I had created. I even looked up one-way flights to distant locations. It was my brother Ryan who pulled me back from the edge, arriving unannounced after Jessica called him, concerned about my mental state. "You do not get to run away from this," he said bluntly, after finding me surrounded by empty bottles and flight searches. "You created this situation. Now you need to stand in it like a man and deal with the consequences." His tough love was exactly what I needed. The next morning, I made 3 decisions that would alter the course of my life. I would commit fully to intensive therapy twice weekly. I would resign from my position to remove Rachel from my life completely. And I would give Natalie the space she needed, while demonstrating through actions, not just words, that I was changing. My resignation conversation with my boss was humiliating, but necessary. I took full responsibility, explaining that I could not in good conscience continue working with Rachel's company after what had happened. Despite the career repercussions, the relief of that clean break was immediate. I wrote Natalie a letter that took 17 drafts to get right. No excuses, no self-pity, no implicit pressure for forgiveness, just complete accountability and a promise to respect whatever decision she made about our future. I gave it to Jessica, along with my wedding ring, telling her there was no rush for Natalie to respond, if she ever chose to at all. Then I began the hardest work of my life, rebuilding myself into someone worthy of trust, whether Natalie ever trusted me again or not. 3 months passed with minimal contact from Natalie, beyond practical communications through our lawyers. I moved into a sparse 1-bedroom apartment closer to my new job, at a much smaller marketing firm where I had been transparent about my situation during the hiring process. My life became structured around therapy sessions, support group meetings for men dealing with relationship issues, journaling, meditation, and rebuilding connections with friends I had neglected. The guilt remained a daily companion, but gradually transformed from a paralyzing weight into a motivating force for change. I stopped drinking entirely, began volunteering at a local youth mentorship program, and reconnected with my parents in a more authentic way than we had managed in decades. On what would have been our anniversary, I received an unexpected text from Natalie. "I am doing okay." Just those 4 words, but they were the first personal communication in months. I responded simply, "I am glad. You deserve every happiness." No pressure, no questions, respecting the boundaries she had set. 2 weeks later, she called. "I think we should meet," she said, her voice formal and distant. "Coffee at Meridian Tuesday at 10. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop equidistant from our respective new homes. I arrived early, sick with nerves, uncertain what this meeting meant. When Natalie walked in, the sight of her hit me with physical force. She looked different, a new haircut, different style of clothes. But what struck me most was the guarded self-possession in her posture. This was not the open, trusting woman I had married. This was someone who had been hurt deeply and had rebuilt her defenses accordingly. After brief, awkward greetings and ordering coffee, she got straight to the point. "I am pregnant," she said, her eyes meeting mine directly. 4 months now. I found out the week before I received that letter. The timing confirmation hit me like a physical blow, exactly as I had feared. While I had been betraying our marriage, she had been discovering we were going to be parents. I have been working with my therapist to process everything she continued. The betrayal, the lying, the manipulation, all while trying to make healthy decisions for this baby. It has been the hardest period of my life. She described in raw, unflinching detail the trauma my actions had caused her, how she had questioned every memory of our relationship, wondering what had been real, how she had blamed herself initially, thinking she had failed me somehow, how the embarrassment of having to explain the situation to family and friends had compounded her pain. I listened without interrupting, without defending myself, or trying to explain away my actions. This was her time to be heard, something my affair had robbed her of. "I do not know if I can ever fully forgive you," she said finally. "But I do know I want our child to have a father. So I am willing to try to establish a working relationship for the sake of our baby." Her conditions were non-negotiable: complete transparency about my whereabouts and communications, continued therapy, both individually and eventually together parenting classes, and a clear understanding that we would proceed as co-parents, first with no promises about reconciliation. I agreed immediately, making it clear that I expected nothing beyond the chance to be involved in my child's life, that I would respect whatever boundaries she needed for however long she needed them. Those first months of cautious co-parenting were awkward and painful. We communicated primarily through text, met in public places for discussions about the pregnancy, and attended doctor appointments, side by side, but emotionally distant. I never pushed, never complained, showing up consistently, exactly as promised. When Emma Rose was born on a snowy January morning, I waited anxiously in the hospital corridor until Jessica came to tell me Natalie was asking for me. Entering the delivery room, I stayed in the background, aware of my tenuous position in this pivotal family moment. The nurse asked if I wanted to hold my daughter, but I looked to Natalie first, waiting for her permission. The slight nod she gave changed something between us. Holding Emma for the first time while standing beside Natalie's bed, I made silent promises to both of them to be the man they deserved, to never again put my selfish desires above their well-being, to spend every day earning the second chance I had been given. The first year of Emma's life, Natalie and I lived separately, but established, effective co-parenting routines. I never missed a pediatrician. Appointment was punctual for every custody exchange and documented everything for Natalie when Emma was with me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension between us began to ease. The first time Natalie called me just to talk with no Emma-related agenda felt like a significant breakthrough. She had read an article about a marketing campaign I had worked on and wanted my professional perspective. The conversation was brief, but cordial, ending with her tentative laugh at something I said, a sound I had feared I would never hear again. By Emma's second birthday, we had progressed to attending counseling together, cautiously discussing what reconciliation might look like. The trust rebuilding process was painstakingly slow, with occasional setbacks when old pain resurfaced. But we were both committed to the process, both for Emma's sake and because, surprisingly, we discovered that the deeper honesty required by our situation had created a new foundation that was potentially stronger than before. On what would have been our 5th anniversary, we held a small private ceremony, not legally necessary, since we had never finalized our divorce, but symbolically significant. We rewrote our vows with hard-earned wisdom, promising not perfect fidelity, which we had before, but perfect honesty and the courage to be vulnerable with each other, which we had not. Today, looking at Natalie playing with Emma in our new home, I understand that the anonymous letter that exposed my infidelity ultimately saved me from myself. It forced me to confront the broken parts I had been hiding, not just from Natalie but from myself. The painful process of rebuilding trust became the path to becoming someone capable of true intimacy and integrity. Our relationship is not perfect. We still attend counseling regularly. Trust remains something we consciously tend to rather than take for granted. But the intentional nature of our recommitment has given us a resilience that our earlier, more naive relationship lacked. I share this story not to excuse infidelity, but to offer hope that even our worst mistakes do not have to define us permanently if we are willing to do the difficult work of genuine transformation. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after it was broken? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story of consequences and redemption resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more stories of growth through adversity. Consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that while we cannot erase our mistakes with courage and humility, we can write a different ending to our story. Thank you for listening, and remember that true redemption is never about escaping consequences, but about facing them with integrity and allowing them to reshape you into someone better.